of drains down, and these are all mature trees, a mature tree area. And there is a little bit of a low spot and drainage area likely to occur over here once they get into grading and the final details of everything. Typically in newer subdivisions, when there's floodplain, we like to put an overlay on it, the environmental sensitive overlay. So we take a kind of a environmental inventory of what's out there and how they're going to protect what needs to be protected in order for best practices. You can see on this back side of the FSRL, it is heavily treed at this time. We have asked the developer, they don't show any type of tree easement or protection easement at this time. That may be something that happens when we get further into the weeds with the subdivision. But they have addressed that, and over at least verbally with us have said that, you know, these all aren't the best quality. So some of these will come out as they plat lots and development occurs. Staff is recommending approval with 2 conditions. One is basically to put a note on the master plan that acknowledges the annexation agreement and that they will comply with the annexation agreement as they move forward. And then to add that rezoning, that environmentally sensitive overlay to it. So the zoning would be FSRL and OE, and FSRM and OE on a future map. And so with that, I can answer any questions that you might have.
The OE is what?
It's an overlay. O is for overlay, and then the E is the environmental sensitive.
And the SFRM is going to be in the pink area?
Yep.
And that's for apartments or?
Single family attached is what their master plan shows.
So the whole area is going to be single family?
Possibly. I mean, this isn't the final layout right now. But
when you say single family attached, is that more like duplex or side by sides where they have one shared wall?
Okay. Or townhomes.
Okay.
It can be more than a 2-family home.
The road that runs from southeast to northwest there on the major part there, looks like the street that comes off of Cameron School Road comes in cul-de-sacs there. Well, I know you said this was still preliminary, but were they thinking like the same thing there, a cul-de-sac or?
I think so, yeah. So, I mean, based on our subdivision requirements and fire code, they'll have to have at least a turnaround since this won't connect to this one. And there's no plans for this to connect if that's what you're trying to get to. Yeah. So there will be a cul-de-sac or something larger for that to allow that fire truck turnaround in there.
So I think we discussed that in the addendum to the report. It's not that it couldn't be connected. The developer's not proposing it at this time. It doesn't necessarily have to be proposed either at this stage because it's not part of the hierarchy of the street system the way Cameron School Road and GW Carver is. So at subdivision is when you'll really be looking at that. Unless it's necessary, I'm sure the applicant's not going to propose it, but we aren't really reviewing that exact feature of the project at this point in time.
Are there requirements for say like surface water retention?
They'll have to comply with 5B, our stormwater subcode. And then they also, in that annexation agreement, they have agreed to work with staff. There's a new state code that requires nutrient reduction, and there's different ways that they can do that. And so there's a statement that they agree to work with staff on that as we, as they start planning the grading and lot layout and things along those lines.
And one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Jones that was here at the last meeting discussed the two, they're just above the top of the green there. There's a couple of ponds there. Will there be any change to the drainage of that area then? She was concerned about it being affected.
There shouldn't be, as this is all going to be their open space. You know, as far as how close grading may or may not get to these property lines, the developer is going to have to speak to that because we haven't seen that yet. But I don't, Kelly, I wasn't at that meeting. Kelly was, we discussed it, and we think it will likely have no impact to the
Okay.
ponds.
The applicant can probably address their plans for that area too better than we can at this point.
Okay.
Can you? Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay. Can you just speak a little bit more to what's included in that environmental sensitive overlay? What's included in that?
In terms of requirements or area of the property.
In terms of the requirements?
So effectively what it does is it requires any disturbance within that area to be subject to approval by the city. So you can do it as part of a preliminary plat. So when we do the preliminary plat for this property, we're going to do stormwater management. That's required. If there's features that are in the overlay, that's part of the assessment of the natural area, and then that's reviewed as part of the preliminary plat. If there wasn't a preliminary plat, if it's somewhere else in the city where it's commercial or something, it triggers council review of that same type of activity. So one way or another, the city is involved at the city council level in making a decision of whether that disturbance is acceptable. It could be regarding a floodplain. It could be, in this case, steep slopes. It could be related to wooded areas. It could be related to any type of natural feature. It isn't exclusively the floodplain. It does exist to the southeast here on Scenic Valley, same ridge line, same lowlands in relation to Iowa Creek. So there is an easement over part of that area, and it's also zoned. When Scenic Valley was approved, I don't think the overlay existed, but it was applied after the fact when the overlay was created, I believe. So it's basically, in this case, we're following essentially how it was done with Scenic Valley, that the ridge line would have some level of protection. Whatever types of encroachments into the tree lined areas would be defined through the subdivision level. So Scenic Valley, when we got to the lotting, we looked at how the lotting related to the tree lines. We wanted to make sure there was a buildable envelope on those lots, and that it wasn't necessarily requiring removal of trees to do that. And then how those lowlands were managed, all of that was kind of put into an easement just to ensure that no one was trying to do something that was going to degrade the environment there, but just to make sure it was secured with that easement so that it was able to be managed and the city could be responsible for how activities occurred in the future. So that's where we're coming from. It's consistent with the comp plan and sense that this is a greenway, it's environmentally sensitive area. That's the tool that we have. We think it's appropriate to apply.
So the retention ponds and the outlots will be decided on later on, right?
Yeah, I think
After when the platting occurs.
Yeah, absolutely. So the green areas, I think we kind of go through this in every master plan. Exactly what does the open space mean? It clearly shows intent to have this border, especially to the northwest. In the center of the project, there's going to be open space of some type, and then clearly to the southwest as well. What's stormwater features? What's private open space? We haven't even discussed what park space may be expected with this. We've had that conversation in other subdivisions. Does the growth now, because of Plan 2040's expectations, is there any kind of a pocket park requirement? Is it a private open space requirement? Those things you deal with at subdivision. This is to just generally illustrate those areas that will likely not be disturbed by the project. Maybe stormwater, maybe open space.
And then there is going to be a road into, what do you call that area
The
again?
agricultural area,
What?
the ag area, the agriculturally zoned area
No, on the south, down.
Oh, Scenic Valley.
down here.
There.
Oh, yeah. So this connects to an existing road, and this connects to an existing road. These lots aren't platted and built out yet, but this road exists up to approximately this point right now. So.
Okay, and there's nothing with the commercial node yet.
No, because that area is remaining agricultural at this point.
I'll come back later. Are there any other questions for staff?
I guess I have one more question. Just thinking about the large tree stands in that area, and that a lot of people, I know a lot of people who would move out there would want trees. It's kind of, out in the country, nice. And then you also brought up the comment about you want a buildable envelope. Is there precedent from the city to do a conservation easement that would protect tree stands?
Yeah, there's a few of them. The two that come to mind are the reserve over by Ada Hayden, and then again, Scenic Valley just to the southeast of here. Those are kind of the two model conservation easements that I would assume would be how we would treat this property as well.
Okay. I know with respect to the buildable envelope, you want to make sure the developer has enough, and I don't know if it's a city requirement, but I definitely support that, having some sort of conservation easement there to protect tree stands.
But in the green area to the southwest of that is going to be tree protected in the conservation area, the green area.
They've
Yeah, so-
already shown. Well, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we would presume, again, we're not looking at a subdivision, so you can't say with certainty exactly what the dimensions of anything are, but you would assume that large green triangle is an outlot that is not owned by any individual. It would be a common area or an outlot for the association rather than private property.
So I imagine that whole area is probably sits pretty low, doesn't it?
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
yeah. There's a ridge right
Yeah.
there where the trees are.
Right.
They are
That's what I
showing
thought.
an area as right here that they are already planning to preserve. But over here there isn't anything officially designated yet.
Mhm. Are there any other questions for staff? If not, would the applicant like to make any comments at this time?
Hi, Greg Broussard with Bolton and Mink. Excuse me. Heard a couple of comments. Just want to talk to them to hopefully give some clarity. One was the question on kind of the very far northwest corner. Our thought there is to install a cul-de-sac. We've looked at dimensions, make sure we're meeting minimum or meeting the block lengths, and be able to get that fire truck turnaround there. One of the other questions was about stormwater. So the intent of the green areas, we're still working through kind of what it looks like, but the centerpiece there, that's a natural low-lying area. So that's the kind of the prime spot for the internal to kind of build our stormwater management. So to do some there, also looking to do some down on the bottom because that's a natural low-lying area too. So kind of letting the water go where it naturally wants to set, not trying to build on top of it, trying to match the way that it's set up today. The only other thing about the discussion on the trees. So on the very far kind of on the southwest corner, so we have had a full environmental assessment done on the property with another consultant who's had a forester on site. And the trees we know along kind of on that west and the south side, those are old growth trees. They've been there for a long time. We want to make sure we protect those. The trees on the ridge, you can look back through aerials and see not too long ago in tree kind of age that was those are recent plants or recent plantings, and they're not the best quality. We are going to preserve as much as we can, but we may have to adjust and trim that line a little bit as we do our grading and make sure we can get drainage and the buildable envelopes there. Any questions for the developer? Luke might be able to talk. Otherwise, I can answer any questions you
A
guys
lot
may
of
have.
cottonwoods.
I don't honestly know what types.
I'm just curious about not hooking up to the street with the other cul-de-sac.
Yep. So a couple of things we looked at it. One, the way that was platted, there's not a great right of way to get to it. So we'd have to work with those adjacent property owners. We like the idea of the cul-de-sac on the end there. And we're still, once again, this is, like Kelly said, this is conceptual. We'll still work through the final design and make all of the final determinations. But initially, that's where we're thinking.
I think you can't really tell here, but when we were looking at it, we being city staff, the bulb does touch their property, but it's probably a small, maybe it's 20-ish feet of right of way that touches the property. So how that would work if necessary, we haven't explored that yet. It's a gravel road. It's platted a long time ago. How that we haven't really had an experience one way or the other with trying to connect to county subdivision roads. So it would be something that definitely has to get explored if that was to happen.
You guys do realize that in '93 that was all underwater on that in that triangle.
which is why we are not showing any houses there. We're having that be green space on purpose.
Are there any other questions for the developer? Seeing none?
Right.
Is there anybody from the public in the audience that would like to make any comments at this time? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment period. Any other discussion amongst the commission?
I guess just one comment when you get to the plating. I'm just kind of thinking of it now, but the pink area can go a slightly higher density than just single family. That's where we were talking about shared wall structures. Does it allow at all for, I think I read in here that it was apartment buildings up to 12 dwelling units in there? Is there any plan for that? Or are they mostly saying at this point, single family or single family shared wall?
What the zone allows versus what the master plan says are two
Yes.
different things. So theoretically, FSRM allows for apartments of a density up to 22 units per acre or something like that in a maximum building size of 12 units per building.
Okay.
That's what that's describing. The way
But
the master plan is labeled, it says medium density residential use, single family attached. Staff is supporting single family attached. It doesn't mean that someone couldn't come back with a PUD overlay in the future and try to address how multifamily housing would integrate into a single family area through the PUD process. But absent that, it would be single family attached based on the description of on the master plan.
Okay.
So you have to live with, so the master plan, you have to live with the land use descriptions and the building types that are put onto that. That's kind of the intent, is to have a general understanding of what the pattern of development is before you get into a more precise, defined engineered site plan or preliminary plat.
Gotcha. So without any PUD overlay or some other change, that would not change at this point because the master plan will dictate.
Correct.
Okay, that's all.
Any other discussion? And with that, then what would the commission like to do?
I guess I do have one question for Kelly. Notices were put out for this meeting today. I noticed there's none of the people that were here.
Yep, that's interesting, but yep.
Yeah, and I'm kind of nervous on that with,
So I
There
think,
was-
right, we had the one couple show up twice and they did speak, the one that did comment about the northwest side of the property at the second notice hearing for this, or
one of them did, yes.
the continued notice.
Mhm.
The first time we probably had maybe 3 parties of people here that seemed to be interested in the project. I agree. There's no one here, right? But we sent new notices last week for this. And then there'll be another set of notices when it goes to council as well.
And it will come back here for when it's platted.
Yep, preliminary plat. So they're actually proposing to split it into 2 lots, like to the blue area and then everything else, so they can kind of look at it as 2 development sites. That level of plat doesn't come to the commission, but when they get to an actual preliminary plat that's creating buildable lots, that does come back through. That also has notice to the adjacent property owners.
So the one in blue is going to have to come back here when it moves from agricultural.
Yep, to do something other than an agricultural zoned use, it would need to come back. So the religious institution conceptually could happen in an agricultural zone through the Board of Adjustment. If that occurs, that'll be a different process and you wouldn't see it. If it is rezoning to residential or to add commercial at the corner per the node or the neighborhood core designation, that would absolutely come back here.
And there's still plans on doing a roundabout or something up there.
There's no
Some kind of-
roundabout, no roundabout, very clearly, no roundabout.
It does. I think we said that they are contributing to a signal, right?
Yeah, so
It's
can't,
not-
Okay.
yeah, Cameron School Road and GW Carver, the city accepted transportation improvement for the future as a traffic signal.
Okay. At
You
one
may have
time, it
heard-
was talking about a,
You may have heard other people suggest a roundabout, but that is not the city's answer for this corner.
okay, good.
No one else wanted to fund a roundabout, so we are doing a traffic signal improvement in the future.
Any other comments or questions? And with that, I would entertain a motion if anybody would like to do so.
we have to read all the alternatives
Yeah.
out or just the one?
Just the one you're trying to make.
I'll make a
You want-
motion for alternative one, which is the Planning and Zoning Commission can recommend that the city council approve the request to rezone 85.62 acres, portion of the larger site known as the Bluffs at Giant Bar Farms from A agricultural to FSRL suburban residential low density and RM suburban residential medium density with a master plan, and add the environmentally sensitive overlay OE to the rezoning description of the project to include floodway, and B, add a note reflecting a reference to an annexation agreement.
Here we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, then all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. The motion is approved. The next item on the agenda is the North Dayton Urban Renewal Plan conformity finding.
All right, good evening. You have before you this evening a proposed urban renewal area and plan. And the particular, I'm going to get a map up here for you to look at. So the particular location of this you may be familiar with. We've had a couple of items come through here, actually a few just in the last year. This is property that over the last year has been annexed and rezoned. And most recently, we've had a preliminary plat that you saw that went on to council. City council did approve that. This is for 73 acres along North Dayton Avenue, just west of the USDA, 2105 and 2421 Dayton. And this is a proposed future industrial subdivision. And we're bringing to you tonight a proposed urban renewal plan, identifying the urban renewal area, which is hatched there, those two parcels. And you're being asked to review and recommend accordingly as to conformity with the general plan for the development of the municipality to the city council. So, real quick, just a few details. In reviewing this, what you're looking at, obviously, is really a conformity to the comprehensive plan for the community. And we outlined some things there in your report in regards to Ames 2040, how the proposed development will comply and lines up with the future comprehensive plan. When we talk in there, as you can see, this will be a what we call a small lot type of industrial development. There will be part of it will have speculative buildings on it as well. This does sit a fair distance from any existing city neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods. It also is contiguous to the existing built city and the existing city limits. The previous city limits were right along Dayton, and we just annexed those two pieces to the west. So it moved on to the west there. The intent of this is to provide an incentive for economic development. So the developer will install all of the public improvements to city standards to create the subdivision. And for those qualifying public improvements, the city will give a reimbursement of sorts to the developer through annual tax increment financing payments. So that's really the summary of the plan and of the location. And we have our recommendation there, which is for alternative one. And I can answer any questions you might have further.
Are there any questions for staff?
Okay, you have the current general obligation bond debt out here, and the city of Ames is going to have to incur additional debt to do some build out on here.
No, we won't be incurring any additional general obligation bond debt. We just provide that information as far as a total debt number, as far as background. What the implication is here, as far as indebtedness, is that when the city collects the tax revenues each year annually, based on the TIF agreement that we have with the developer, the city will owe a certain portion of increment from the development of this property to the developer for the public improvements that they have installed. What that means is, as far as indebtedness, the city is required to certify to the state every year a certain amount of indebtedness, and any tax increment finance agreements are included in that total.
So what we're doing, what city is be doing is paying for the utilities.
We're reimbursing the developer for his installation of the infrastructure.
So the city will be paying for the utilities. That's a yes or no.
The city will be reimbursing the developer for.
It's not a yes or no.
It's not a yes or no question because it's
Yeah, it is.
It's not framed the way the financing of the project is working. The city is giving tax increment to the developer. The city is not securing debt to pay the developer to do anything. So increment is, you can say, yes, we're funneling increment to the developer to reimburse them for something. So in that sense, yes, but we're not using city revenues that we already would have or have to create to pay the developer.
Then where's the money come from?
Comes from the increment of value caused by development in the property. If there's no development, the city pays them nothing. If development happens and it generates tax revenue, it goes to the developer for the defined amount of time or the defined dollar amount
Okay.
in the development agreement.
Okay.
So it's not the same as saying we're going to pay you to build the street whether development happens or not. They're only seeing that return if the development follows the investment. We chose that's relevant to the conformity finding, but we chose that model because it's less risk for the city. In the other versions of this, the city has created urban renewal areas. We've put the infrastructure in with no guarantee development's going to follow. So it's a more defined process. City controls it, but council determined in this case it was more risky for us to do that because the payback can be extended. In this situation, the risk is put back on the developer that they can actually realize that vision. And so, like on the model that was used for this is the South Bell area. The city built South Bell. The city extended water and sewer. It's going to be like a 17 to 18 year payback on that investment. The agreement here is for 10 years of payment to the developer. So if it doesn't reach their
So they put in the sewer and everything and utilities, and then we just pay them back for it. If they put it in.
revenues are generated from the project.
Yeah, it's development first.
So we as staff in this case thought that was a much better risk scenario for the city in terms of economic development out in this area.
Okay.
So yes, we're required under urban renewal for the urban renewal plan to identify those debt limits because theoretically it could be against your debt limit. In this case, it is not by the structure of the development agreement. So every renewal plan will always show you that information, may or may not. The project itself may or may not be counted as debt against that limit. If we were building the project, it would count as
Right.
debt against the.
That's
the
what
limit.
what it sounded like at the beginning was that we were going to build some structures there, and if we build it, they'll come. But I understand what's being said now.
Yeah. So every plan will always kind of have this exact same information. It may or may not count as debt.
And any other questions for staff?
Yeah. Does this area meet the definition of urban renewal area under Iowa code?
Yes, because you're allowed to do it for economic development purposes.
Okay.
On land within the city. You can't do it in the county, and you couldn't do it in certain situations that are outside of the city, but within the city, this is absolutely available for economic development purposes.
This isn't the definition to where it has to be blighted in some way. Am I thinking of a different?
Correct. So
concept?
that would be the slum and blight finding.
Okay.
But for economic development, you can essentially apply that to any kind of vacant land.
Okay.
So you can do it one of two ways. Economic development has a maximum duration of 20 years. Slum and blight has no maximum duration, but you can't apply slum and blight to ag land.
Okay.
That's
Gotcha.
the distinction.
Great.
Any other questions? Is the applicant here? Doesn't look like it.
We are the applicant.
We are the applicant. Okay.
The city of Ames is the applicant.
Is there anybody from the audience that would like to come forward and make any comments? Seeing none, I'll close the comment period. Any other discussion, or would anybody like to move some sort of action?
Anybody get a motion?
Yeah, if there's no comments, I'll move for alternative one. We make determination that the proposed urban renewal plan is consistent with the Ames 2040 comprehensive plan for the reasons enumerated in the plan, and have staff forward the determination to the city council.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion is approved. The next item on the agenda is the text amendment to the standards for home occupations.
Good evening. Earlier this year, the state passed a law pertaining to the regulation, or how cities regulate home-based businesses, which the city of Ames calls home occupations. They are the same thing, just slightly different terms. The new regulations preempt local law and limit how the city can regulate home occupations, particularly regarding no-impact businesses, which I'll explain in just a minute. And because of the new state law, we are obligated to change our regulations to comply with the new state law. Home occupations are considered a secondary use of a property. They are allowed in all residential zonings, and they allow for a wide range of uses. The way that our current code regulates home occupations is that we have a list of uses that are permitted with staff review, a list of uses that are permitted with review by the Board of Adjustment, and then a list of prohibited uses. The new state law and breaks it down by criteria as well of how each use is allowed to operate. The new state law does not allow cities to regulate home-based businesses by use, which is a big sticking point in our code, but does allow them to regulate by intensity of use and potential impacts to a neighborhood, such as parking, noise, odor, pollution, etc. The new state law defines a no-impact home-based business as one that is operated within a building or in a yard out of view of surrounding properties and doesn't create any negative impacts, any negative externalities on the surrounding neighborhood. If a business is classified as no impact, the city of Ames cannot require a permit of any sort or any kind of additional review. It is allowed by right. The city receives a complaint, then we can respond to that complaint and enforce the regulations. Staff has worked with the planning staff has worked with our legal department and with our building official to craft the regulations that we're proposing to you tonight to comply with the state law and to account for ease of enforcement as well. Major things to note in the changes to the code are an increase in the amount of the dwelling unit floor area. It's now not to exceed 50%. We're allowing for business activity in a yard with a screened-in fence, or when it's screened by a 6-foot-high fence, which functionally will mean that it will have to be in the rear yard because you can only fence in your side or rear yard. Clarifying the parking criteria, establishing a set hours from 6:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. if there are off-site employees. The off-site employees meaning that the the comings and goings if you have an outside employee. So it's not meant to prohibit you from, working into the wee hours of night if you're the resident of the home. Setting a new maximum occupancy for employees and clients. Expanding the list of prohibited uses, and we also moved daycare regulations out of the home occupation section and into its own section. Currently the way that it works is the daycare regulations are sort of sprinkled in with the other home occupation regulations. It's kind of confusing. The regulations are tacked on at the end of long paragraphs that pertain to daycares, and so we just took all that, broke it out, put it in a new section by itself because it really does operate differently than a standard home occupation. Staff does recommend approval, and I can take any questions you have.
Are there any questions?
Yes, part B, section C, item 7. Does that conform with the new state regulation that was just voted on?
On which page?
Be on page 5.
Those are the existing regulations.
So again, is that?
So we're getting. I put the existing regulations in there for reference. So we're getting rid of all those. We're just rewriting it. There are a few regulations that are attachment C is the proposed regulations.
C is okay.
Mm-hmm. So I put that in there for context so you could understand, especially in particular how it's structured with the uses that are allowed by staff review, by Board of Adjustment review, and by that are prohibited, which is the sticking point really. We tried to keep as many of the criteria that you see here in the current regulations as we could. Reconfigured it a little as well to get rid of big paragraphs, break them out, make it easier to see what the individual regulations are in the new proposed code in attachment C.
I'm having trouble understanding. So the new law, doesn't allow for regulation based on use, but how does moving the childcare, the daycare section to just a different part, is that allowed by that state law? That seems like it would conflict, I guess.
So if we don't, we'll be precluding daycares.
Right. I understand. I understand why.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
The answer is yes, we can do this because otherwise we will be precluding daycares. We can be more permissive than the law. So we want to create a section that is more permissive than what a home occupation would allow otherwise to support in-home daycares.
Yeah.
And the current structure had all these caveats for daycares to treat them differently from home occupations, but they were in the home occupation section.
Okay.
So
State law doesn't require us to treat daycares as home occupations.
Got it.
Oh,
It's just that's how our code treated them. And state law, there's a whole giant section of state law that pertains to something like a daycare, as you might expect, for different ways that they're based on the number of children that are there and how they're operated and how they're regulated.
Another question I had is so how will this affect this change affect existing uses? And I guess, do you expect any issues with existing home occupations based on any changes based on that law? I guess, do we see any issues?
So any permits that are existed can continue to exist so long as they comply with the new regulations. So it's if you're complying with we have the criteria that are set forth in the new code, and that's in section 4. And if you're not in compliance with the criteria, you'll either have to change the way you operate or you'll have to stop operating.
So there's no permits that have been issued that permit something that's not allowed under the new law?
I wouldn't. I mean, again, we're regulating it by intensity of use now. It's
Right.
not use anymore. And before we started with the use. We still had the criteria. I understand your question. I haven't gone back and looked specifically at all the permits that we've issued. We don't know when they stop either. So we issue a permit and there's not you don't have to renew it annually or anything like that either.
I think I would say almost all of the criteria we're proposing is equal to or slightly more permissive than the prior standards. The only one we defined hours of operation now. That used to be a ZBA choice. So for all I know, someone had a permit that said they could operate till 8 o'clock, and now we're saying 7 o'clock is the end of that. But otherwise, so much of this mirrors what was there, with just enough tweaks to make it compliant that I'd be hard pressed to believe any of those special home ocks that went to ZBA would really be in conflict with this.
And so moving forward, then it would pretty much be a complaint-based system. Everybody who's permitted is permitted at this point, and the city will no longer take permits so long as, you know, everything has to be, how did you phrase that? It has to be through intensity of use and conform. And then if you get a complaint on something that, for example, your non-permitted uses at the very back are your prohibited uses, then that's when you could potentially crack down and say this intensity of use is not acceptable.
Yeah, except for the prohibited uses are different, obviously, than everything else. The state law does give us the ability
Oh,
to
they do.
prohibit certain uses, and
Okay.
then a number of these others are uses that set out in going over that by their very nature could not comply. So,
Gotcha.
If you had a firing range, in your backyard, that's going to create more noise than is allowed.
Right.
Or a dance club, that's going to create by its nature
Mhm.
noise, and so therefore it won't be in compliance with the criteria.
So basically moving forward, no permits unless you hear a complaint, pretty much.
Correct.
Well,
And
we
then
no
it'll
permits
be,
ever.
yeah, there won't be any permits if we receive complaints. As I said earlier, we worked with our building official, and she oversees our inspections division, and they'll be the ones who will be going out and looking at addressing directly any violations of the code.
But there's no annual review or
There's not.
There isn't now. Once you have a permit, enforcement is by complaint basis. So I think
so
there's maybe
permit
2
is
in
in
10 years that had
Pepper.
complaints.
is forever until there's a problem.
That's how, yeah. So when you're the zoning board of adjustment, you're getting a right to operate that doesn't go away unless you are acting not consistently with your permit. And then the ZBA would have a right to hold a hearing and revoke your permit for non-compliance. That just isn't
So
really how it works. I mean, it
so the
doesn't
state
happen
just
that way.
loosened up the laws.
So the state said there's a base level of things the city can't say no to. City council said we're willing to go a little bit higher than that and simplify the process because the way we were doing it before just seemed overly complicated when we couldn't deal with as many things as we had previously. And again, we've had most of the things that went to the board of adjustment were very, very routine. There was 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 15 where there was neighbors and maybe had some things they wanted answered about it. I don't know that any special home occ was denied except for maybe the snake breeder, but he eventually got approved also as a revised application. So the intent before was to approve them. It was a very clear purpose statement that the city's goal was to allow for as many home businesses as could be deemed compatible. So that was kind of the perspective when you went to the board of adjustment, was to allow for them if possible. So council's just saying, yep, it's all possible if you meet these standards now.
The first community that I worked in actually regulated home occupations as we're proposing to do, where you had criteria and then it was a complaint driven basis. And I don't know that we ever in my years there had an issue with the way that it was done. So I don't think that the way that we're going to is outside of, the realm of what's reasonable.
I was trying to compare the two, but maybe you can speak to this. Are there any changes to the childcare, the daycare portion, or truly just implementing, putting in that section what's currently enforced or what's current policy, I guess?
The only real change because I had to deal with it. So the classifications, the section 1, section 2, section 3, that's all current code or definitions that we use in the current code. So none of that's different. The dedicated area, that's lifted from the current standards. The parking and traffic, because of how it's intertwined with home occupation standards, that didn't transfer over very
Sure.
well. So that section is new, and it follows the intent of the old code, which was the Board of Adjustment gets to decide if how you do pick up and drop off is compatible with the neighborhood, rather than precisely saying you need 4 parking spaces or you can't do this or that. The Board of Adjustment has discretion to make those determinations. That's the 5, section 5, parking and traffic is the new section that's trying to approximate the intent of the prior home occupation standards.
Okay. Thank you.
And section 6 is lifted verbatim as well from our current code.
Are any other questions or comments? Hearing none. Would anybody like to take some action?
I guess I'll make a motion that we approve alternative 1, recommend that city council amend the home occupation regulations as presented in attachment C.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion is approved.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda, item 9, is the zoning text amendment to allow a 20% reduction in required parking for certain commercial and industrial uses on sites with more than 100 parking stalls.
All right, thank you. So this is a zoning text amendment request that came to the city on behalf of Strandon Associates. It was actually from them on behalf of a regional furniture store operator. So the initial text amendment request that was requested from the city council was to change the current parking rate of 1 space per 500 square feet, which applies to display stores, wholesale trade stores, which includes furniture stores, to change that from 1 per 500 to 1 per 750 square feet, which would reduce that parking rate approximately 20%. The staff went back to city council, and we actually proposed a broader option that would address that specific request, but it would also make more of a comprehensive change to the parking standards that would address some things that we've run into with developers or individual requests with developers over the years, which is to provide more of a comprehensive reduction in commercial parking, at least for commercial and industrial uses in base zones. When someone has so much parking that they just don't want it, they don't need that much. This is seen as beneficial because this is an opportunity to be able to reduce impervious area when it's not necessary. There also are some added stormwater benefits to this, as well as potentially in certain cases being able to, keep the overall footprint of things down across the city, or at least be able to provide for they can have slightly larger building with the less parking and not have to have a larger parcel of land. So what the proposal is for adding a provision into the parking standards whereby the planning director, if it is requested by a developer or an owner of property, to waive up to 20% of required parking if that particular parking lot exceeds 100 stalls in size. So this would address typically pretty large parking lots. We give some examples there below that we list in the report. Even Fairway over here with their required parking, they would not qualify for the reduction. You'd have to get something like Super Walmart. We highlight Workiva in there, large office spaces or really large industrial spaces for this sort of thing. A couple other things to have in mind with this. So currently we have some other reduction allowances that people can take advantage of. One of them is there is a 10% reduction in parking that is allowed if there is a proportionate increase in landscaping, and that's through the landscape standards. That provision will still apply. It will be applied after this particular provision is applied to a site. So this will get applied first before any other reduction is allowed to be applied. And then, of course, there is a small reduction that you can get through providing a given amount of bicycle parking on site as well. So those reductions would be, again, applied after the 20% reduction allowance is applied if it's requested. We also plan to treat existing sites that do additions is when the addition is done, you have to exceed 100 stalls on site before this would be allowed to be applied, which I think is a given, but it'll come down to individual site reviews and things like that. We have a lot of sites from over the years that have different configurations of parking. And so, again, based on what they're proposing to add, it's what the total is after they add any additional parking for an expansion. And then finally, joint use and remote parking agreements. Those are looked at on a case-by-case basis, and the agreement language themselves would need to address and enumerate anything with regards to this reduction allowance. So with that, I think that really covers it. The section that we would be amending is 29406 section 2, and we'd be adding a new item there. It'd be letter F with the new allowance and the standards associated with it. Also, one other thing too, any residential uses or sites this would not apply to. The residential parking rate is applied based on occupancy, so there's more of a sensitivity there for that. And then also special purpose districts, because many of those uses have their own special parking rates in those sorts of districts. So those will not, those aren't involved in this. This wouldn't apply to those. This is just base zone commercial and industrial types of sites. That's all I've got.
Are there any questions?
With the example of Amcor warehouse, if this passes or goes into effect, they can only take it down to 100.
That's correct. Yeah. So there may be a case where they're over 100, but taking 20%, literally 20% of that amount off would drop them below. They wouldn't be able to go below 100.
And there's been,
Except for other allowances to go lower.
Correct.
So
Such
we
as
have that
landscaping.
example in the staff report. If you want to remove parking to add landscaping, you're allowed to do that. If you want to
okay,
remove 5 spaces to add bicycle parking, you can do that. So that's
but they can still only go down to,
This reduction itself on its own
right.
would not allow you to go below 100.
And there's been a study done where this reduction won't hurt. I understand there's less pavement, but will it be the detriment of the surrounding community?
Yeah, I think when we thought this through and presented it as an option to council, based on where our commercial and industrial properties are, for the most part, we don't see how there's a threat of like overflow kind of filtering into neighborhoods and impacting someone's quality of life in those areas. These larger sites just don't abut residential areas, and we haven't had any, for the most part, in the industrial areas where people are constantly asking us to be able to reduce the amount of parking they need to construct, just because there's just lower intensity of employment and more square footage on a site. So we really didn't see industrial as having any particular concerns for this.
Okay, I can't remember. We did something special with Mary Greeley and McFarland.
Yeah, so we just lowered everywhere but the hospital medical district, the medical office parking rate from
Right.
for small sites from 7 to 4 per thousand.
Okay, with this, would Mary Greeley be able to reduce their parking?
No. So the way this is written, it only applies to a base zone. The hospital medical area is a special purpose district. So there is no reduction in any of those. So basically South Lincoln mixed use, downtown Gateway, hospital medical, those are the three big ones.
Okay.
This does not apply to them because they have unique conditions or they have unique parking standards that just 20% off the top doesn't necessarily make sense. So it's all your standard areas, all the general industrial, all the highway oriented commercial, all the planned commercial areas. Those are the ones that could benefit from this.
Right, the city doesn't think that 20% is too much?
Not once you get over the 100. So that's why we put that table in there. When you go to Target, you go to Super Walmart, the odds that you need 550 parking spaces versus 450 parking spaces about zero in this world nowadays, compared to 1990. So a lot of parking standards are based on the 80s and 90s. Just isn't the way most of these large retailers operate any longer. Same with industrial office employment. You just don't see that same level of employees on site consistently to need that. Nothing says you can't build more if you need it. It's just that we're not expecting to see that need. Again, the 100 space threshold it's pulled out of thin air, but it's a pretty convenient number when you start to compare to how big a building you have to have. And demand really doesn't scale directly in a linear relationship with square footage. When you do parking studies, it's generally not that way. We all live with a direct linear relationship, but that's not really how parking studies prove that out in most cases.
Wouldn't it be more beneficial just go a flat 10% off of everybody's except Mary Greeley's?
Well,
I've seen that one place.
So what I believe in my experience is smaller sites will always need parking. So you need to have a base level. And we decided that we were comfortable with that once you got to 100, the demand doesn't go up nearly as quickly as the square footage goes up. So we could set a different threshold, but I'm always going to recommend that those smaller sites need to have a base amount of parking rather than reduce.
I agree.
Parking
That's
for
what
everybody.
we.
So we're not reducing.
Careful
it
of
for
is
everybody.
reducing the parking too much. Once we reduce it too much, there is no going back.
Right. I have no concerns about that at the 100 space threshold. If we were to say it's 25 spaces or something much lower, I would have some reservations because that's going to be smaller sites that are adjacent to residential areas. That's not this situation.
So
Right. Like we just did that coffee place down Best Buy. That's going to be what I thought was fairly tight on parking with Best Buy and the coffee place. And you have to build for Black Friday.
You don't. I mean,
You don't.
That-
Nobody will
how,
show
that
up
was
if
the
you don't.
mentality of prior parking standards. So for the past 20 years, the city has been whittling down parking standards. I mean, I think we used to require almost 6 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet for shopping centers effectively. And we're down to 3.3 spaces per 1,000. And now we're even saying, if you have a really big shopping center, you can cut another 20% off. So that's been the trend for over 20 years is we're cutting parking requirements, and we have not had an issue with each step along the way of cutting parking since we've been doing that. The old mentality was absolutely you park for the 15th busiest day of the year, and that sets it for the whole year, even though there's only 15 days in the year that you actually may need that parking. And that is not the philosophy that Ames is embracing any longer. That's just an unnecessary use of resources.
I think 2 of the examples they pulled provide really good context for me anyway, because they just redid that Super Walmart North in town. I live right by there. That would have been a great opportunity at the time to cut parking and to somehow arrange that frontage in a better way. And so that was a missed opportunity if we didn't have that in place. And a huge example is the Workiva office. That is way
Where's that
overbuilt
at?
on South
Research Park,
side.
Airport, and University.
Okay.
By the
Now I know
roundabout
exactly.
It's
there.
really set back from the street
And
behind
I
the
think it's
prairie.
even worse now that a ton of it remote work happened with Workiva. And so you drive by there almost any time. And I don't think you see more than I mean, I guess I don't go by there during normal business hours, but it's a big parking lot.
And the other one to think about, the other one we thought, I don't know if we have that in list in examples. The other kind of use we wanted to be conscious of was a restaurant. So a restaurant would have to be almost 11,000 sit down restaurant. So think like a Chili's or something that's a big user on Friday night, right? High demand.
Texas Road.
Texas
Park?
Roadhouse,
Yeah.
Hickory Park, whatever that is. You would have to be over 10,000 square feet before you're going to need 100 parking spaces because the rate's 9 per thousand, I think.
Yep, right.
So you need 11,000 square feet in that sit down restaurant before you even get to that 100. So the standard size of a Outback or a Chili's or anything like that is not 10,000 square feet. So those uses are still going to meet minimum parking. They're not getting relief. Hickory Park's way over that number. So yeah, theoretically they could take advantage of that reduction. But your standard chain sit down restaurant, they're going to be parked as you would expect anywhere else in the city. And I'm not claiming 9 per thousand is the right number for every one of those, but it is a pretty high number for most of those uses.
Would you guys have the ability to deny the developer if they request it and then the city shoots back saying, you know what, we think your use is going to be, even though your square footage meets this criteria to get this cut off? Would you be able to deny based upon or require them to do a study or something?
The way this is worded is it says may, correct?
Right.
But it doesn't provide any criteria.
Okay.
So council asks, is this discretionary or not? It's essentially written to be non-discretionary.
Okay.
So our site plan review process has about 12 basic findings you have to make. You'd be hard pressed to probably deny the reduction and because you couldn't make one of those general findings. So if there was a concern that I should be able to say no, I would need to write it into this language so that I have something to say to prove what is necessary for me to exercise that discretion. Because I think my discretion is very, very limited with how this is written. You should assume it's automatically going to be granted.
I feel like based upon the examples specifically that you provided, it seems like a slam dunk to me. I do wonder a little bit if there are some circumstances in which we may wish we had that parking. But again, based on the examples provided, I'm not seeing any wish. I'm wishing that we had less paved space. So I'm generally in support of it. But
So to be clear, it might not result in less paved space. It might just result in more efficient use of building area on a site. So some sites will have less paving because they just don't want it. It might facilitate, like in the furniture store situation, it's going to facilitate the construction of that building on the site.
more square footage they would go after
Yes.
for their building
Yeah.
lot. Okay.
But I would say where Kiva's situation, you'd have more green space because they just don't want it.
Yeah.
There's two different situations that this will cover.
So it could result in more buildable space then instead of
Yeah,
just
absolutely. This is a lot different than, and we talked about that with the furniture store, the 10% reduction that we have now. It's to increase landscaping, not to increase building area. So this is different. This is not, and this allows you to have more building area if you so choose.
Gotcha.
Are there any other comments? Hearing none. What would the commission like to do?
I'll make a motion for alternative one, recommend that the city council approve an allowance to reduce required parking by up to 20% for non-residential uses within commercial and industrial-based zone districts, excluding special purpose districts that require more than 100 parking spaces, provided such allowance does not reduce the number of parking spaces below 100.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
Nay.
The motion is approved. Next on the agenda is commission comments. Any of the commissioners have any comments? How about staff comments?
I do not have any particular comments.
Okay,
Anything coming up? Anything not scheduled?
We didn't give you a tentative agenda for December. I think it was too indeterminate that I wanted to put that out there. So I don't know that we'll have our first meeting in December. There's some other things going on. Depends on some things. So like, for example, on council, we're working through the Baker subdivision and the LIHTC proposal for a partner developer for affordable housing. That's on Tuesday. If there's some direction there, that might spur an action that needs to happen in December that'll come back to you. There's some other things out there that depends on certain other factors, but I don't have a definite development application I know for sure is coming back.
is there anything else for the good of the commission? If not, I would entertain a motion to
I
adjourn.
guess I have one other comment. I'm trying to think back. Did I report to you guys that the Link project on Lincoln Way that is going to be moving forward? Did we talk
What?
about that at
Which
last
project?
meeting? Did I talk about that under comments last meeting?
Lake project.
Okay, so back in March, the end of March at the last city council meeting, the Link is the Lincoln Way project between Clark and Kellogg. City council reviewed preliminary development terms for that, and they had a discussion item for it, and 2 weeks later they had an action item to move ahead. So we are directed to move ahead with finalizing a development agreement for that property. So the zoning's already there. The development agreement won't come back to the commission, but ultimately that does require major site plan review. So it's really consistent in concept with what has been out there as part of our reinvestment district application. It's the large hotel, 2 apartment buildings and a large office building, and then ground floor commercial and some structured parking. So that obviously is a significant development project. If that moves forward here and gets finalized for a development agreement this winter, we could see the developer moving forward in the spring and summer with site plans and other development plans that will have to come back to you and then to the council for final approval. So
They've gotten the other 2 properties that are there.
there's one that will not be part of the site. All the other ones are under the developer's control.
North or south?
North or south?
South. Okay.
No, north or south. I don't know what that means.
Property.
The Romantics property is not in the project, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I was wondering if they got the
No.
pawn shop.
Yeah, that one has been. It just hasn't been torn down. That one's been under developer control for a long time.
Oh, okay.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
We are adjourned.